So tonight, I have a few people I need to thank. Crow Creek Brewing, who has been sponsoring this event for 4 years now. I'd also like to thank the Visitor Center and the Lead Area Chamber of Commerce for hosting this event. And of course, Black Hills Energy for sponsoring the mixer and bringing us tonight's speaker. So tonight, we are going to delve into the history and industry of power resources in the Black Hills. Our speaker grew up in Wyoming and attended the University of Wyoming, where he got a degree in electrical engineering. After college, he joined Black Hills Energy, working with their team in Wyoming for 10 years. 2 years ago, he became the Director of Electrical Operations in South Dakota. In this role, he worked to build and maintain power systems to provide safe and reliable services to power customers in South Dakota. Tonight, he will discuss the history of energy in the region with an emphasis on Homestake Mining Company and the Sanford Lab, as well as preparations Black Hills Energy is making for the area's future energy needs. Please help me welcome Marc Eyre.
On. Can everybody hear me? Well, thank you. This is awesome. Great turnout. I appreciate everybody coming out today. As was mentioned, I'm fairly new to the area. I moved just over a year and a half ago from Wyoming up here, and we are loving the Black Hills. I was talking with a couple of folks in the mixer this past summer. We love the outdoors, so we hiked the Centennial Trail start to finish. Did it in about 10 days, and of course, since I've moved here, everybody says it never rains this much. We never get this much snow. So we went the week of 4th of July, and I think we got hailed on, rained on. There was a tornado at one point by Dalton Lake, and so we saw it all. But just loving the area. It's been a great move for me and my family. My wife and I have 5 kids, and they're enjoying the schools here and living just outside of Rapid City. So really excited to talk to you today. It was good for me too, learning about the history and really appreciating the communities that we serve in Black Hills. So wanted to start with the safety topic. So one of our core values at Black Hills Energy is safety, and you'll kind of see why. You know, distributing electricity is a very dangerous job, so safety has to be paramount. And so one thing we do is we start every talk or meeting that we have with the safety topic. And today I just wanted to talk about the safety or the importance of being safe around power lines, and this kind of illustrates this. So this was actually in Wyoming, and this is one of our gas territories. So we were out surveying a gas pipeline, and the employee came across a down power line. You can kind of see the power line here. You can see the structure there. So this is a different utilities assets, but kind of a good reminder. So you can kind of see this is the head of a badger, and then the badger's body, a vulture, a wolf, a bear, and then 2 deer. And so you can see that they, had gotten in this line, came down, remained energized, and then as something got into it, it drew more and more animals in. And so just a kind of eye-opening picture, and just shows you the importance that when you see a down power line, always assume that it's energized, keep yourself and your pets away a safe distance, and make sure that we respond. One thing that we've been doing to kind of do outreach to the communities and bring that safety message home is we purchased and created a high voltage safety demonstration trailer. And so it's a way to kind of show a visual of what happens when you get into a power line. So we can hook it up. It's an outdoor display, and we actually put primary voltage on it, kind of show if you get a kite into it or a ladder. And earlier today we had a group, and Connie was one of the folks from Sanford that was there in Rapid City, and we kind of showed that. We've been doing it with schools and things. I think we've done 30 different presentations since we've got that demonstration trailer earlier this year. So you'll probably see us out in the community more and really touting that message of safety and the importance of being safe on power lines. And this is just kind of a chart that just shows it doesn't take much, just a little bit of current and the effects it can have on your body. So, just a couple of amps and it could lead to death. So just a reminder, always assume it's energized and stay away. Okay, so just a quick overview of Black Hills Energy, where we are today, and then we're going to step back and how we got started here so many years ago. So today we're a natural gas and electric utility that spans 8 states. The far east, Blytheville, Arkansas, far west, Cody, Wyoming, and you can see the territory in between. And we've grown quite a bit just over the last couple of years. So as was mentioned, I started in Wyoming in 2007. And at that point, we were a electric company, mainly in the Black Hills, with a little bit of natural gas in Cheyenne. And then you fast forward to today, and we are a large natural gas company with 3 electric utilities. Our natural gas footprint is significantly larger than our electric today. So we have grown 20 times our customer base since 2005. And those are primarily through acquisitions of other utilities. We serve over 1.2 million customers in 800 communities across the 8 states, and we are the largest publicly traded company that's headquartered in South Dakota. And you've probably seen the new corporate headquarters that's up off Highway 16. And so really that, as we acquired other utilities, we brought the company headquarters and brought those jobs to Rapid City, where they would have been in Lincoln, Nebraska, or Fayetteville, Arkansas, or Denver, Colorado. And so those corporate functions that support all 8 states work out of that new building up in Rapid City. And when you serve that many customers, you serve all sorts of customers. So I don't know if anybody recognizes who that is. Kanye West, yeah. So this is actually a gas crew we had out in Wyoming. And Kim Kardashian and Kanye are looking at some property there in Cody, and we're actually building the gas main, and I guess they're checking out schools and some other things, and so they stopped by and took a picture with one of our, this is actually a contract crew that works for us, but our gas crew putting in a new main out there, so you never know who you're going to come across serving 1.2 million customers. So just a little bit of breakdown between the electric side. We have 3 electric utilities. Black Hills Energy South Dakota, which I lead. And so that's about 72,000 customers in the Black Hills area, parts of eastern Wyoming and Montana. We have our Cheyenne utility, and then an electric utility down in Pueblo. And you can see on the gas state, over 1 million of those customers, the 1.2 million are gas customers across the 8 states. Yeah, again, just some of our footprint here in the Black Hills and the communities that we serve. So really I wanted to talk and dive in a little bit. The 2 resources I use, so we have 2 great books. The first was our company history, which they just republished. A great resource. And then I found, I think Jim might have got me this, but it's a history of Homestake Gold Mine. And so I kind of use both of these books as reference to show the information and the history. And really, as you read both of them, you just realize how big of a partnership the 2 had. And Black Hills Energy wouldn't be here or who we are today without Homestake in the mining industry. And as you look at Homestake, a lot of their development and resources and things that they did are now owned by Black Hills Energy, or at some point served those. So really been working hand in hand for over 100 years, and that will continue into the future. So it all started back when gold was discovered, right? So who's given credit for discovering gold in Black Hills? Ross, right? Yep. So, there's different accounts of gold being found earlier than that. I think as early as the 1830s, but generally Horatio N. Ross was given that kind of distinction. So in 1874, as part of the Custer expedition, they left from Bismarck area, coming down through the Black Hills. They were near French Creek when I think he was a miner by trade, first discovered gold. Of course, as word got out, that started getting people interested in, of course, the gold rush of 1876. And one of those folks that heard of that report was Moses Manuel, on the right here. So Moses, and he was in Portland, Oregon, when he heard about that. It was in 1875, and so he started coming out, that would be east. He stopped, picked up his brother in Montana, and they made it to the Black Hills late 1875, and they started down in the Custer area. And after an unsuccessful winter there, they started to move towards the northern hills. And of course, in April 9th is what the date they have. Him and his brother discovered a lead right here where now is where the open cut is, and of course that gave the name for the town of Lead. And so as they developed that lead, they kind of just did some crude construction, and they actually made $5,000 that first year. And so as George Hearst became aware of this, and so the next year, 1877, he was a California mining entrepreneur, and reading a little bit more, I think he got a lot of his money from the Nevada mining operations there. And so him and his partners optioned and later purchased the Homestake mine or the claim, and then the Gold Star claim, and it was a total of 10 acres at the time. And they officially incorporated Homestake Mining Company in November 5th, 1877. And at the time for that claim, those claims, they paid $70,000. And if you think back in 1877, that's a lot of money. You know, in today's money, I think that's $1 or $2 million. So to think to put $2 million in that, so they were, he had some resources. I was just reading out in the lobby that I think he was estimated to have about $20 million from his, mining operation in Nevada. And so that money was put to use here in Lead and in Deadwood. And, as it goes, he would buy anything he could. So that 10 acres went to more than 8,000 acres and produced over 41 million ounces of gold over the course of Homestake. So if you think an ounce of gold today is worth, like $1,500, $1,600. So if you $1,500 times 41 million, you can see what that $70,000 investment eventually became. It's really an amazing story there. So about the same time as this is going on, back east, they're starting to develop the light bulb and uses for electricity. And so who's given the credit for inventing the light bulb? Well, we'll have to find out. The movie comes out tomorrow, so we'll have to watch it. And I'm an electrical engineer, so I'm kind of a nerd, but I'm really excited to watch and just see what they do. Of course, I think this is, they got Benedict Cumberbatch playing Thomas Edison, so we'll see. So actually between 1806 and 1878, there was actually 20 different creations of the light bulb, but they couldn't get it to stay for very long. The filament would burn up. And so Thomas Edison actually wasn't the first person to invent the light bulb, but he was the first one to perfect the light bulb. An interesting story with Thomas Edison, I think it was in 1878, he was out on a fishing trip in Wyoming, relaxing from some of his public engagement, and he got it, went as part of like a hunting trip, and one night when they were standing around the campfire, a bamboo rod fell in the fire, and he noticed that it didn't burn up right away. And so he took a mental note, and he went back and they used a bamboo carbon filament as the next iteration of the light bulb, And that's the one that lasted 15 hours and kind of took his light bulb to the next level above the competition. Then within a year, he had a light bulb that would last about 1,200 hours. So this one's kind of a softball question, but so who was the first town to have electricity? Of course, Deadwood, right? And I was researching, and it's really hard to find out, but I think really out of the western, other than like New York and back east, Deadwood was one of the first towns, outside of that east region to have electricity. Chicago, Kansas City, all those, Deadwood. 1883. Yep. So if you remember, Homestake was incorporated 1877. So just 6 years later, and that's really what drove the creation of the first power company here, was that the mining industry bringing other shops and things to Deadwood. And Rapid City was 3 years behind. So in September 17th, 1883, Judge Squire Romans and partners, he had Colonel Pilcher and Mr. Bauer, organized the Pilcher Electric Light Company in Deadwood. So that's when Black Hills Energy officially started, which would become Black Hills Energy. So in 1883. And again, at first, it was just for lighting shops, to produce light for the different storefronts and homes in the area. So they bought an Edison dynamo, which was a steam turbine that generated electricity. And back then, they couldn't just get it to the Black Hills. They had to take it by rail to Sidney, Nebraska, and then, stagecoach or horse through from Sidney all the way up to here. So quite a feat to get it up to Deadwood. And that's actually a picture of the dynamo back there. So this was an interesting bit of history, and one that I thought was fascinating. So reading through some of the material, I found that it wasn't necessarily the first, but one of the dynamos that was originally put in Deadwood, which generated electricity. And at that point, it was DC. It wasn't the alternating current like we have today. But it was installed in 79 Sherman Street. So I looked that up because it sounded familiar. And I'm on the lead Deadwood Economic Development Board. And at our last board meeting, we actually met Scott Jacobs, and we went and toured the new facility, or his renovation of Jacobs Brewhouse and Grocer. And he was showing us some of the original plaster, they have signatures from the early 1900s, like 1902, 1903 type time frame, all there. So they've got a plan to kind of preserve that, which is really, really fascinating to see that address and then to see what it is today. So that was the Pew grocery store, and shortly after this, they sold it to a different person. They moved that generator to a different facility, but for a moment it was, at least there was one there, 79 Sherman Street. So this is an interesting article, so I'll just read this. So this is from 1887. It says, the Electric Light Company of Deadwood has received 25 incandescent lamps that will supply a long felt want. They can be used on tables, desks, anywhere an ordinary lamp is used. Gives this splendid light and will soon come in general use here as they are in the East. Light chandeliers can be seen at the Star and Bullock store. Can also be seen at the Operation Tonight at the Electric Light. I like how they had to advertise and just say, these can be used just like an oil lamp. Just wait. So that's a picture of one of the original light bulbs there. But kind of interesting how it first started out. And again, at that point, there were smaller generators generating in direct current DC, and so they really only had like a block or two radius that they could feed. So you'd have to have multiple generators. You couldn't transmit the power as far. So Pilcher Light, which would become Black Hills Energy, started in 1883. It was 5 years later that Homestake first had electricity in one of their facilities. So the first place that they had it was at the Star Mill. And so they used it again for lighting. You can kind of see these lamps coming down. So they used that dynamo, their own dynamo, to generate electricity for 75 lamps at the Star Mill. See that? So at this time, they still weren't using it for running any of the machinery, but just for lighting. So as the demand for electricity grew and they saw other applications, they realized that they needed to beef up their generation. So there's actually several early hydro plants. I've read at least 4. The 2 that I'll talk about today are known as Hydro 1 and Hydro 2. And Hydro 1 is still in operation today, which is pretty amazing. So Hydro 1 was placed in service in 1906, and they had built 5 miles, they built a wooden flume to keep the water from going into the ground up Spearfish Canyon down, and it's right by the fish hatchery today. So if you've seen it, it's still in operation. That's a 4 megawatt capacity generator, still original parts is what was built at that time. And again, it was sold to Spearfish. They own and operate it, and Black Hills Energy has a purchase power agreement. We're buying 100% of that energy. And we just work to extend that contract through 2024. So we buy all that energy from them and use it to serve our customers in that area. But pretty amazing. The second one was placed in service in 1917. That's Hydro 2. There were some others that aren't in operation. In 1947, landslide in Spearfish Canyon damaged the conduit system, and then later it was shut down and it was sold to the South Dakota Game Fish and Park. So they started to use more and more generation to start, with fans and motors, things like that. But even with all this generation, I think that's in the next slide, but it was only about 7% of their total load, so they kept needing more and more generation. So then they started turning to coal fired generation, and the Kirk power plant, the first one that they built in 1934. That's a picture of it here on the right. This is the Hydro 1 that's in Spearfish. There's the Kirk power plant. And eventually that was later sold to Black Hills Power in late 1954 and was in operation. Wow. So in Black Hills Energy side, the Pluma steam power plant, 1905, I thought this was interesting. And it kind of deals with lead a little bit more, but another group of investors, they organized the Belt Light and Power Company in Lead in 1893. And shortly after, they combined with the Pilcher Light. So they were constructing a steam plant in Pluma. The group wanted to run a DC trolley between Lead and Deadwood while lighting the city of Lead. By 1905, this plant was powered the Black Hills mining communities of Lead, Pluma, Central City, and Terre. And this is a picture. I think this is probably after the turn of the century, but worker piling coal in to run those turbines. And that's a picture of them there as well. So spraying the hot water off there before we had cooling towers and all the EPA regulations and things. So just a little bit about the Homestake electric load. So like I mentioned, it was just about 7% of the total power, so they needed to continually have more. They had as they grew, they had over several thousand electric motors. So if you think of that, and then almost 10,000 lights. And so the electric demand was big. So the partnership with Black Hills Energy, Black Hills Power, was imperative to their growth as well. Their connected load was about 50,000 horsepower, which would equate to about 35 to 40 megawatts of power. And to put that in perspective, 1 megawatt would serve about 1,000 residential homes. And so the Homestake mine was using more power than most cities in South Dakota. for many, many years. So just a little recap of the timeline. So they find gold. Moses and Fred Manuel discover the Homestake lead. They sell it to George Hearst, and he invested a lot in the community and really got Homestake off the ground. About that, just after that first railroad in the Black Hills was started by Homestake, that would bring wood to the mine. And then in 1883, they organized the first power company in the state here in Deadwood. 1884, they changed names to Black Hills Electric Light Company. 2 years later, the Rapid City Light and Gas Company was started by that same Romans to serve Rapid City. They started operation. 2 years later, the first electric light was used at Homestake. And then a year later, South Dakota was admitted to the Union, so all that happened before South Dakota was a state. And then several years later, the Belt Light Power Company was organized to serve Lee in the surrounding areas here. So if you look, just after the turn of the century, 1905, the Belt Company and what was the original Pilcher Light and Power Company merged to create Consolidated Power and Light Company in South Dakota. And then in 1906, they started to use electricity for the mining operations outside of just lighting with the hydroelectric plants. The Kirk plant came online in the 1930s, about the same time as the Ross shaft was placed in operation. And then the Yates shaft came in 1941. And then also in 1941, all of the small utilities in the Black Hills region were consolidated into what is now Black Hills Power and Light. So in Belle Fourche, in Custer, Hot Springs, up here in Lead and Deadwood, all of these kind of consolidated in 1941. It was all under the Black Hills Power umbrella. At that time, to fuel their coal-fired plants, they had opened up, Homestake had opened up a mine in Gillette, just outside of Gillette, Wyoming, or Wyandotte mine, and they sold that to Black Hills Power in 1954, and that's still in operation today. A lot of the base load generation that we have for this area is actually still being generated out of Gillette, out of that complex today. Again, 1965 was a big year there, so excavation began to construct the Solar Neutrino Observatory for Dr. Raymond Davis, which would play a factor in how the mine is used today. And then, as you see, in 2002, the Homestake closed, and then it was donated to the state of South Dakota for an underground lab. And we're really excited now for the LBNF project to continue to go. So as you look at that history and partnership, really it was key for Black Hills, what would become Black Hills Energy, for their development. You can see that continues today. And so not only are we the power provider for the Sanford lab and want to work with them, we're really excited for the future with this new project and want to continue to partner. You can see Black Hills from that time till now had grown quite a bit through acquisitions. About 10 years ago, there was about 100 investor-owned utilities in the country. Today, there's about 50. And so acquisitions, we're not going to grow as much through acquisitions in the future. We're going to grow through the communities we serve growing. And so it's really important that we partner with the community and help them be successful. That's how we're going to grow as a company. And we believe that as the communities grow, we'll grow as well. And so that's why we've put a focus on, sponsoring events like this tonight. The Homestake Opera House, you can see there a few familiar faces there. And then, sponsoring Neutrino Day and being involved with what's going on here at Sanford is critical for us. As you grow, we'll grow as well. And just wanted to kind of drive that point home. So this morning we were in Rapid City. We had an employee-led United Way campaign, and we donated $293,000. And so this needs to be updated. This was last year, but that was employee dollars that we raised to support the United Way, to support all the agencies that they support throughout the Black Hills. And again, just the commitment to the community and helping the community thrive and grow and be healthy is important to us. I found this quote and I really liked it, and I might just read through it, but it kind of shows the struggle they had at first to provide reliable electric service. And in some ways, that struggle is still going on today and really a focus for us. And so it's interesting. This is again in December of 1883. And so it's just really interesting to read. So it says, patience and perseverance, it is said, accomplishes all things. The experience of Judge Romans with his electric light certainly demonstrates this truism. Laboring under innumerable disadvantages and against a pronounced public prejudice, with entirely new and unadjusted machinery throughout, would have indeed have been remarkable had the light been perfect from the onset. It was imperfect, it flickered as though possessed, and finally expired. Undismayed and familiar with the capabilities of this plant, Judge Roman instituted a work of corrections that happy results, as shown by the operation of the lamps last evening, and will continue until the nearest point of perfection is reached. And so really that determination for reliable service is still what we have today, and one of our key areas of focus is providing safe, reliable electric service. And so one way that we do that is we measure the outage minutes that we have, and we call it SAIDI. So that's the System Average Interruption Duration Index. And so this is an industry standard that all utilities use to kind of see how reliable they are. And essentially what it tracks is how many minutes a year your average customer is out of power or without service. And so if you do the math, we have over 500,000 minutes in a year. And so last year in 2018, we had 57 SAIDI minutes. So on average, over the whole year, an average customer was without power 57 minutes out of the year. So that equates to 99.989% of the year. So having said that, that's all 72,000 customers that we serve. If you're on a rural circuit that has a lot of overhead exposure through rough terrain, again, there's going to be some that are above that, making the average what it is. So what we do is we look at it at a whole, and we look at it at a circuit by circuit basis. And so what feeder or circuit that we serve has the most outage minutes, and we can look at things, and I'll touch on them, that we can do to improve reliability there. The other thing we track is the frequency of outages, so not only how long it's out, but how often that power outage occurs, and so that's called safety. And so in 2018, the average customer is out 0.6 times, so just over half an outage per year per customer. So our goal is to be top quartile. So this is an example of a benchmarking study we did with IEEE with other investor-owned utilities. And so you can see, again, this was 2017 results, report that came out in 2018. We were in the top quartile. And we want to continue to do things to reduce that outage time for customers. So really to do that, we have three main strategies. First is know what we have and inspect, and that's our O&M maintenance activity. So all the assets that we currently have in the ground, in the air, we know where they're located and what condition they're in. If there are issues, remediate those in a timely manner. The second focus is looking at the age of our infrastructure and material that's outdated, end of life, and having a capital budget to replace those in a timely manner. So right now we do a 5-year capital forecast where we look at the next year and out 5 years of what's going to be needed to invest in the system. And one thing you find with the utility, it's very capital intensive. Wires, poles, generation facilities take a lot of capital up front to build out. Then the third one is leveraging technology, so the new innovations to either reduce or eliminate outages. Talk about that. So the kind of O&M activities, these are just a couple that just wanted to highlight. So the first is line patrol. So we go out and inspect every asset we own once every 5 years. And on the transmission, it's actually twice a year. And that oftentimes the twice a year inspection we fly because it's long distances. We'll fly with a helicopter. And then once every 5 years, actually be there physically walking the power line and inspecting those. And so if we find an issue, we have a policy for replacing it based on the severity with timelines associated. So an example of what we would find here on the left, when we came out for the line patrol, this pole wasn't there, it was just this, it was in a horse pasture, and of course the horse had cribbed on it and had chewed the pole away. You know, just one windstorm, it would knock that pole over. And so that's something that you would only find if we're out walking each of those lines once every 5 years. So we installed a new pole next to it, was able to transfer the wire over and remove that old pole. The other thing we do is pole inspection. So we actually drill the pole and check for the integrity and the rot in the pole. That's currently on a 10-year cycle. So every 10 years, that pole gets tested and treated to try to extend the life of that pole. The next one is infrared inspection. So we use thermal imaging. And this is an example of like an insulator, where if you were looking at it with the naked eye, it would just look like a porcelain insulator, look gray. You wouldn't be able to tell. But it was actually starting to fail. You have a hot spot there. Eventually that's going to track over and cause an outage. So we were able to find that, replace the insulator before it caused an outage. Avian retrofits, it would amaze you how many squirrels get into power lines. And so I'd say at least once a week we have a squirrel-related outage. So things that we're doing there is just avian retrofit, wildlife retrofit. So anywhere there's jumpers or coils, anywhere you could have two different potentials. What we're doing now is we have a insulated cover that goes over that bushing, and it keeps squirrels and other animals from getting in there. We insulate any wire coming down, so they certainly could chew through it. They find new ways to get into things, but it has drastically reduced the amount of wildlife outages we've had. And anything we build new, we build avian safe and with the wildlife retrofits, and then we proactively go around and anywhere we have an outage from that, look what we can do to insulate or isolate to keep that from happening again. And then we have a very strong vegetation management plan, obviously working through Black Hills National Forest is something we take very seriously, and as our top priority, it's to keep that power line safe through that area. You've all seen in the news what's happened with PG&E and some utilities out in California, just the risk to public safety. And what they're doing now is they won't take that risk. They'll shut off power before they'll have a risk of a potential wildfire. And a big part of that is vegetation management, making sure that we keep our right-of-ways cleared and keep the vegetation away from the power line. So right now we're on a 5-year cycle where we trim every line we have once every 5 years. Go down to 4.
4 years for distribution.
For transmission. Thanks, Tim. Well, pine beetle has been, we've had to trim more. Yes, if we have a dead tree from pine beetle, we'll cut it. That even if it's outside the right-of-way is where it gets tricky, we'll try our best to do it. Sometimes we have to work with landowners. Forest Service, we can do that. But yeah, we look at pine beetle kill and make sure that that's cleared away from the line. And really with that, one other thing that we mentioned, we're finalizing a wildfire prevention plan that specifically looks at those and prioritizes our risks based on where those lines run. Yeah, so it's really important. And you can see the importance of that. So as we maintain it, the age of our infrastructure, you see 16% of our assets are 50 years or older. And so as we make that capital plan, we've got to look at those lines. There was a line we replaced this year down by Buffalo Gap. It was installed in the I think it was 20s time frame. So it has had its useful life, and it's time to replace it. So, looking at that and prioritizing those, we've got a couple programs that do just that. One is our distribution system integrity program. So where we proactively look at the age of pipe and poles, and we can see as they get a certain age, the failure rate exponentially increases. And so instead of waiting for a winter storm to blow a pole over or to have a failure in the middle of the night, we can proactively find those areas and replace them a couple of years before they're going to fail. Really, that's at the heart of DCEP there. Also, as part of that, the underground piece, not only looking at overhead lines, but underground. In the late 1970s, early 1980s, underground cable for their insulator around that cable, used a hard plastic called XLP. And that plastic is starting to crack. And this is something that's happened across the nation, not just here in the Black Hills. All throughout the industry, that old XLP cable is starting to crack, and then it will short the ground, causing an outage on the underground. And so we've identified every stretch of cable that we have there and are proactively replacing those instead of waiting until they fail. Some larger transmission projects that have been key for us. One is a 230 rebuild that we actually just finished up in September last month. This was a transmission line that goes from Rapid City down to Stegall, Nebraska, which is kind of outside of Scotts Bluff, and it brings power to the region. It was originally constructed in 1963, and so we broke that into two phases. We did about 80 miles last year, replacing from Rapid City to the state line just south of Hot Springs, and then this year we did just over 90 miles from in Nebraska, essentially. So really the benefits there were different conductor sizes, and we were having reliability issues with the poles failing and things, so we rebuilt that line. So it not only improves reliability, not only to Black Hills Power or energy in the area, but also the other utilities that use that service. So it's part of a common use system where other cooperatives get power off that line. So we've done all that. We've maintained our system. We've replaced, and we've got a capital plan to replace old end-of-life material. So now we should never have an outage again, right? Well, then the bar gets out, and if there's an intoxicated driver or a distracted driver, I don't care if, that line, you have one pole in a 20-mile stretch, there's a magnet on that pole, and that driver will hit that pole 100% of the time. So these were just a couple pictures I had on my phone. There's certainly more. These are just ones I could throw into the slide real quick. So, yeah, they're going to hit a pole. This is an example of one, sheared off the bottom of the pole. It's a three-phase line, neutral on top. This one was operating 25,000 volts, and it's still energized right here. Just the car went through it. These are the guy wires here that were just help holding it, up. So that's still energized. So just another reminder, if you come across something like that, call 911 right away and we'll come de-energize, get it fixed. This is one in Spearfish just earlier this year. So if you looked at it one way, you couldn't tell that the pole was broken, but this was 6, 7 in the morning. The sun's just starting to come up. No car there, and it was just hanging kind of by tension across the streets. Now this one is a little harder to see. So I was in the shop. This is probably right before 7 o'clock in the morning. You can see that, again, the sun is just coming up. We got a call, hey, we got a car that hit a power line. So our lineman right here, he pulls up. And so this is the guy wire, the supporting guy wire. Somehow it tight roped that and wasn't falling on either side, but it was right on there. So the lineman shows up, it's just about 7 o'clock now, sun's starting to come up. The car's on, the car's in drive, the wheels are spinning, nobody's there. So the cops hadn't done anything yet, so our lineman actually, he opened the door, reached around, turned it off, because that thing comes down and then runs through an apartment or something.
Is that called parallel parking?
Yeah. Yeah, the laws of physics I just don't think that should work. But yeah, the guy wire held up good. So. Yeah, so I think they eventually found the driver of the car. And then, of course, going back, it never snows this much in the Black Hills. So these are all pictures from this year. This was a May 30th snowstorm. And this, you can see icing on the line and how low that had sagged. And some of our crews out responding. So then we have the weather to deal with. This is actually the line that serves Silver City. And so if you remember, it's really rough terrain, hard to get to. And you see a lot of the snow had come down really heavy, split the pole in half, and brought some conductor down. So our linemen out fixing that. Eventually we had to get a helicopter to get to some of these locations. We tried for a while. After a couple attempts, we finally got a helicopter, especially in the Custer State Park area and others. Really reduced the restore time by getting a chopper in and able to get right into those locations. This is a little bit grainy, but this is Winter Storm Atlas. So this is our power line crew working down in that storm. You can see the terrain, the amount of snow that you deal with. Yeah, this was by Northern Hills because I see the snowcat. And then this is, again, just see that there's a Centennial Trail mark. So even after the snow is done, just the amount of mud and the difficulty to get into some of those places just gives you an appreciation of how difficult that can be at times. And this isn't a picture I actually took, but just found on there, but this is what it felt like this spring. It seemed like we had so many lightning storms, and of course that causes issues with our power. And so a couple things we're doing to reduce or eliminate the amount of outages. We have crews on call 24/7, so it doesn't matter. Right now, we've got a crew, a person on call here in Deadwood lead area. We've got crews on call, down in Sturgis, that area, Rapid City, Southern Hills, 24/7, ready to respond, have the truck at home, ready to go. We have an outage management system that we can now use to predict where that outage is occurring. So if we have a customer out of power and calls in, it's going to predict to that transformer that's serving them. As soon as another outage comes in across the street, it's going to change that predicted device up to the fuse, so it helps us know where that outage and where we can go to restore power the quickest. And again, we have mutual aid agreements with other utilities in the area, so if we did have a major event and we needed more resources than we had internally, we've had those agreements, contracts in place to bring outside help in to help restore power. Just real quick, I think we're running out of time. I might just wrap it up here. But a couple areas that we can work on to reduce the outage time, restoration time, is a fault occurs, something gets in the line, and 95% of the faults we see on our system are transient or temporary. So that's like wind whipping the line together, a branch falling in the line coming off, a squirrel getting into those lines. So we use reclosures and other automated things where we try to, when your lights blink, what that is it opens up the line, sees if that fault will clear, and then it closes back in. If the fault's cleared, you have a blink of power and then it's back on. It'll try to do that 3 times, and then if it's still sensing that fault, it will open up permanently. There's something in the line that it's not going to clear itself, and so then we dispatch an employee to come out and fix it. So looking at, fault occurs, the customer reports the outage, so you might have a little bit of time there. So I think we've got some areas we can improve there with automating and automatically detecting outages. We have meters now that detect outages, so that's reduced that time there. You're going to have to travel to that location, but really the time spent trying to find that outage is another area we can improve using technology to know where that predicted device is or where that outage is, and go straight there instead of patrolling the whole thing before we find where it's at. So those are two areas that we really can reduce that outage time. So the fault's located. We can do some switching, automated switching or manual switching to get as many customers on as soon as possible. And then the time to, so hopefully get everybody restored and then make the repairs and then switch everybody around. So I know we're running out of time, but really just wanted to open up for questions. And yeah.
I have a question. Given today's concerns about global warming, what is Black Hills Energy doing about researching the use of renewable energy in the future?
Yep. So that's
Mark,
a
can
great
you
question.
repeat the question?
Yeah. So just with the concern of climate change, what's Black Hills Energy doing? So first of all, we operate in 3 states: Colorado, Wyoming, and South Dakota. Some of those states, Colorado particularly, has a renewable mandate. So by law, they have to have a certain amount of their generation from renewable sources. Wyoming and South Dakota do not have that requirement, but we have customers that want to have those renewable sources in their energy portfolio. So one thing we're doing proactively here and in Wyoming is we have a new Renewable Ready program where we're developing a wind farm outside of Cheyenne, Wyoming. And it's a subscription-based program where customers can subscribe to that. And it's for right now it's for large commercial customers. You have to have a certain amount of load, but you can proactively select to get your energy from that wind farm. Yep. And so really, more and more of our generation is getting away from the coal-based natural gas, wind. We do purchase, as I mentioned, hydro from Spearfish. Then we'll have this wind project that's Black Hills Energy South Dakota does not have any current solar, and really it's the economics. And so if you look at, the availability of that resource, wind is about double what solar is, especially the further north you go. Solar, just the availability makes the economics difficult. Yep. Yeah.
Mark, kind of on that same guideline, you're talking about the partnership you have with the lab here. Have you kind of worked with the lab a little bit with this geothermal experiments that they're doing underground?
First of all, I like your
T-shirt.
T-shirt.
That at all, or?
Your T-shirt's perfect for that question. The T-shirt you have on. I'm not aware of really with the geothermal. I know I know Sanford's been interested in renewables, and as part of this open subscription, I believe they've requested renewable energy from us, and so right now we're working through that process of, I guess, not on the geothermal, but that's with the renewable wind project. Yep. Yeah, the geothermal, I guess, would be interested to learn more and maybe talk with you after about that. Yeah.
There's 2 things. I can say just a few words about the geothermal.
Yeah, perfect.
There's a group that's interested in geothermal R&D. I don't think the Sanford lab site is ideal for extracting geothermal energy. But they are. Yeah, my voice here is sorry. So geothermal experiments at Sanford Lab, they're doing R&D, mainly in support of a big DOE, Department of Energy initiative that we'll set up in Utah called Forge. There's not enough heat, I think, in our facility, certainly where we can access, where that's a viable project for extracting energy commercially. But we are doing R&D, so that's where I wanted to say on that.
Yeah, utility scale to make it reasonable rates for customers who would ultimately bear that cost. That's kind of the test with the solar as well. We found this wind project that was more economical for customers to make it so it's not as big of a rate impact is important to us as well.
I guess I had a question on top of that.
Yep.
You mentioned scaling your business as cities and communities scale. I was wondering if there are thoughts or plans for scaling with the experiments at Sanford Lab, so LBNF Dune, of course.
Yeah.
And then also on top of that, as electric cars, electric vehicles become more popular, if that's part of your planning as well.
Yeah. So I guess first with Sanford, I know we had originally served the Homestake mine, which had a lot of three-phase motors, fans, things like that. So we had a bigger load than Sanford is currently today. But we are planning, we have the infrastructure and the facilities in place. We're expecting, Sanford to probably double their energy use over the course of this project long-term of what they're using today. And so I think we're ready and able to serve that load. I know they've been smaller extensions, but even with some new office space and things that are part of this project, we've done some extensions and brought new services into Sanford for that. So that I think we're well positioned with what had been there before and the demand that had been there. It's like we're well positioned to serve any load in the future. As far as EV, we are actively working on that. So we have an EV program in the development stage. So right now the saturation in South Dakota is fairly small, but we're working on, we've got EV chargers throughout our service territory that I guess we serve them the energy. A lot of them are owned by Tesla, but we're looking at some incentive program to help that market grow. So again, anything we do, we're regulated by the utility commissions. We have to get that approved, but we've got plans right now to partner with that and make those more available and incent customers to install EV charging station. In our fleet ourselves, so I don't know much, you have your hand up? No, okay. Looking at our internal fleet, we've got charging stations at some of our offices, and the vehicles we're purchasing are becoming more, we've got an EV and are actually looking at a line truck, like a full big bucket truck that the hydraulics and things are powered by electric.